Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 16th February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Garish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by David Scott with Northern Exposure. And of course, David reporting from north of the border. Where do we begin? Charity at home, I think, is the expression.
Charity at home or abroad.
Or abroad.
Oxfam again. And this situation, Brian, just gets stranger and stranger. So this is the Charity Commission having launched an inquiry. They say the inquiry was opened 12th of February 2018. We mentioned this a couple of days ago. After the Commission examined documents sent on Monday by Oxfam regarding allegations of misconduct by staff involved in its humanitarian response in Haiti. The Commission has concerns that Oxfam may not have fully and frankly disclosed material about the allegations. They've now given us the purpose of the inquiry and the terms of reference. So they're going to examine the charity's governance and they're going to look through case records, test and verify assurances of the charity's handling of the case and so on. But as we mentioned the other day, I just want to remind everybody that Oxfam carried out a similar exercise last year and reported on the 19th of December 2017. So this is all very strange because they said they conducted a detailed review of relevant records relating to the charity's strategic and day-to-day management of safeguarding. This included reviewing and understanding the mechanisms in place to enable effective trustee oversight over policy, practice and emerging trends in this area. Oxfam cooperated fully with us. We established that the charity has a strong policy framework around protecting staff and beneficiaries from sexual exploitation and abuse, which is underpinned by the activities of a dedicated safeguarding unit. Many of the allegations reported against senior country staff relating to sexual abuse and exploitation were not substantiated, and the Commission has seen no indication to suggest that the risk to staff at Oxfam are greater than those facing staff at other organisations. Engaging with Oxfam following allegations of exploitations and abuse, we have found that the charity does demonstrate elements of good practice. So this is what they were saying in December. They have released their terms of reference. So that's all very good. But actually, Oxfam has revealed its action plan now. And it said that it's going to create an independent commission which will have the power to access records and interview staff in a bid to stamp out abuse and impose stricter controls on employees. We're going to create a vetting system, is what they said. I'm really inviting anyone who's been a victim of abuse by anyone in our organisation to come forward. This was according to the Executive Director of Oxfam International. They said that they will triple funding to more than $1 million to improve safeguarding, while also doubling the number of staff in the safeguarding area and increasing investment in gender training. So that's fantastic, because when you've got a sexual abuse related scandal going on, what you need to do is to make sure people are properly trained in gender.
Yeah, you don't actually look at the crime, what the crime is, who's carried the crime out. You don't look in that direction. You look at your internal organisation and the frameworks that you had or didn't have in place to actually protect people. And then you navel gaze and go around in a circle, and you need something independent. So when I heard you say it was going to be an independent commission, Mike, I knew what we were dealing with here is a cover-up. Perhaps yes. David would like to comment, because Newspeak is very interesting here, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, David, it seems like the Charity Commission is duplicating effort once again, because they seem to have failed miserably to find anything wrong at Oxfam last year. It looks like they're going to fail miserably once again this year. And of course, as Brian says, with an independent commission on the cards, how could Oxfam come out of this smelling anything other than roses?
Well, it makes you wonder who these people think they are. The Scottish Government. I mean, we had almost a full set with good practice, independent inquiry and gender training. We only need a promise that lessons will be learned, and we'll have the full Scottish Government set.
Well, speaking of the Scottish Government then, Scottish Government joining the Australian Government in some kind of sex row. So give us the background to what's going on with the SNP here.
Well, Mark MacDonald was the minister responsible for children, young people and associated policy. He was involved in a sex scandal, which at the time was portrayed as really a bit of a misunderstanding. But because we in the SNP have such high standards, he's going to resign anyway, even though he really didn't do anything. Now this story is coming coming unhinged. He's now being facing other accusations, but it's also come out that when he was forced to resign initially, over the sex abuse, over the sex texting scandal, he was rewarded with £7,000 of taxpayers' money as a golden goodbye in order to ease the transition from having a job to having a job.
Okay, that's pretty speechless with that one. So you get involved in a sex scandal and the government pays you £7,000?
7,270 to be precise is the current value of a sex scandal in Scotland.
Excellent stuff. Where do we go from there?
Well, if that's the problem, we should go to the police in Scotland, I think, David, and you've got a number of very interesting stories here. Perhaps if I just show our viewers a few and then we'll bring you in for comment. We've got the Scotsman, Chris Marshall, Police Scotland needs to act to prevent Gormley Gate 2. Bit of text here says, in a short statement issued last week, Phil Gormley brought to an ignominious end his troubled tenure in charge of the National Police Force. His decision to resign with immediate effect also signalled the premature conclusion of 5 separate investigations into allegations of gross misconduct, any of which, if proved, could have led to his dismissal. So he appears to have bailed out there. I did find this one very interesting. This is a Police Scotland tweet. It's saying, have you, like DCC Livingstone, taken the personal commitment never to commit, condoned or remain silent about men's violence against women in all its forms? And another headline highlighting what's going on. Police watchdog wants reform as Chief Constable's resignation means complaints will never be heard. This seems to be, I'm going to gently use this expression, a dog's breakfast within Police Scotland. What's actually going on here, David?
Well, there are several things. Firstly, to understand what Gormley Gate is, Phil Gormley was facing actually 7 allegations. 5 of them were being independently investigated and 2 internally investigated within Police Scotland. So he was facing 7 investigations, and he decided that his position was untenable and he couldn't, in fact, go back into his post. Now, there's a political background to this because it was a complete shambles. There was ministerial involvement. The Scottish Police Authority, who are meant to regulate all of this, were doing an extremely poor job. So there were mitigating circumstances, but he decided he had to go. Now, unlike in England, where you have something that's called, I think, law, unlike in England, those investigations immediately cease. It's not as if he goes into retirement and the investigation runs its course. Now, this is what Gormley Gate is. It's the fact that when you retire, the investigations just vanish, right? And there's a kind of lingering smell that's left. Now, the Herald article you showed there, this is a very interesting one. This is by David Leask. Now, David Leask, we always point out that it rhymes with mollusk. David Leask was the journalist who did the slime piece on Holly Gregg and Robert Greene, and I think we should never forget that. Anytime you see his name, right, you have to appreciate you're dealing with someone who'll have an attack piece on a disabled girl of a completely appalling nature. So David Leask is writing, he's the chief reporter for the Herald. He's writing here about Gormley Gate. And he goes through this. The interviews the excellent Moya Ali, who raises the issue about the fact that not only is there no resolution for the people who made the allegations, there's no resolution for Phil Gormley either. It's unsatisfactory from every point of view. Right? And at the end of it, Mr. Leask does a very strange thing, because he says the following. He says, the man most likely to replace Mr. Gormley, his respected deputy Ian Livingstone, underwent his own disciplinary proceeding 15 years ago. Mr. Livingstone, a qualified lawyer and former footballer, was demoted in 2004 after he admitted falling asleep in a women's room at Police College Tullyallen, now the HQ of the Single Force, after a drunken party. He was cleared of more serious charges. His misconduct hearing, chaired by John McLean, the Assistant Chief Constable of the Old Strathclyde Force, established that there had been no sexual impropriety or intent on Mr. Livingstone's part. Now, that is what you call a rinse job. This is Mr. Leask trying to resurrect Livingstone's reputation, because he had faced an investigation 15 years ago over very serious sexual assault allegations.
And David, if I can just come in, we can bring one of those original articles about Livingstone on screen. This is the Herald here. High flyer is reduced to the ranks. Policeman will fight action taken after drunken party. And then part of the detail here is the former lawyer and Wraith Rovers footballer has been suspended for 17 months after a WPC claims she'd been sexually assaulted during the party. 5 allegations of serious sexual assault were dismissed, but at an internal misconduct hearing, Mr. Livingstone admitted less serious allegations, including being in the woman's room overnight after falling asleep. So the problem was he just fell asleep in her room.
He was sleepy. That was the problem. And Mr. Leask here has said that he is the respected deputy, Ian Livingstone. There's nothing to see here. And he signed this pledge that he'll always be nice to women. So it's clearly all okay. But you know something, Brian, it leaves me with lingering concerns.
Lingering concerns. And it's just been pointed out in our chat room that the Herald was using Levy and McRae solicitors. I think the law firm, rather. I think that'll be very interesting. We'll come on to that a little bit later. Now, what about the Metropolitan Police and the appointment of Sir Stephen House? We've got the Met Police notification here, a new Assistant Commissioner. We've got the BBC. What do they have to say? Sir Stephen House, former Chief Constable, Police Scotland, has been appointed as Assistant Commissioner to the Met. He was in charge of policing when Scotland's regional forces merged. The appointment will see Sir Stephen take charge of disclosure policy and practice. Disclosure has become a contentious issue following claims that defence teams in rape cases may not have been given all relevant evidence. Forces across the country are looking again at thousands of rape prosecutions.
Well, I can't think of anybody better to avoid disclosure than to put somebody from Police Scotland into the Met.
Mike, you've become terribly cynical since we've been doing the UK column news, and I share your concerns. David, it's like we are watching the pieces move on a chessboard, and where are the pieces going? They're all circling to defend the king. And I think that's because the king has been up to naughtiness, financial and, of course, abuse. But it's just astonishing, isn't it? These appointments are opaque.
Well, and there does seem to be no scandal that is detrimental to your career in British policing anymore. It was quite an interesting couple of pieces there on Sir Stephen House. I mean, I'm actually close to speechless about Sir Stephen House getting that post, but we'll come in. I'll try and find a few words. I thought it was interesting that he was described in the official press release as bringing resilience and succession planning. So you have this management speak again, and his dear friend Cressida Dick was very happy to have him back, because she of course worked with him. It's getting the team together again, because she worked with him with such success in it was John Charles de Jimenez case, was it not?
Indeed. And since you've mentioned the name of Cressida Dick, little Dickie Bird whispered in my ear a few days ago that if you have a look at Cressida Dick's CV, she has a period where she simply disappears. She was a policewoman, then all of a sudden she's not around, and then she's back in her position of present position of power in the Met Police. But a big hole as to where she went for, I think it was about a year. Well, the Dickie Bird told me that actually she'd been working for MI5, MI6. So it'd be interesting to see whether we get more information on that. But getting very, very murky now. Met Police, terrorism, counter-terrorism. and embedded special security forces, as it were. I wonder what she was doing as a former common purpose graduate. And sorry, perhaps we should bring in Peter Chirby here, who's done such sterling work exposing what's going on in the judiciary and the police in Scotland. And you wanted to bring this tweet up on screen.
Yes, £191,000 public cash for the knighted top cop to conduct essentially a PR position to coordinate disclosure of evidence, as in avoid appearance that cops withhold evidence in trials. If a genuine attempt at impartiality, the job should have gone to an independent non-cop, which is a very good point. But the BBC, I think, hit on the reason as to why he's wanted, and quote Cressida Dick again, under the title Huge Change, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick said Sir Stephen would bring experience of leading huge change programmes to his new role in London. So you can expect a change agent, you can expect huge change in London policing, and you can expect not to be told what that change is.
Yeah.
Excuse me, do we think that the changes in London policing could well be that we're going to see further grouping up, further paramilitary organisation in the police? We're following stuff in the EU at the moment, so this would seem a very interesting appointment.
Well, indeed, and of course, since he was in charge of the merging of the various police districts in Scotland, and we're seeing increasingly pressure to do the same in England, perhaps he's being placed
in to do that,
to help with that procedure as well.
Yes. Well, one thing Scottish police have not been doing is investigating criminal activity. And quite remarkable that we were having an informal chat, David, last night, and I asked any news on the Heather Capital fraud, and you said no, it seems to have gone into the long grass. Well, just remind our viewers, this was what was regarded at the time as a fraudulent Ponzi scheme around the Heather Capital hedge fund. Huge sums of money involved overall, about 400 million, but some 92 million went missing, and the trail appeared to lead towards law firms in Scotland, including that law firm Levy-McRae. So the Herald here was giving the report, the suspended sheriff, that was Peter Watson himself, a global web of intrigue and a money trail worth millions. This was all criminal. Some of the detail here you can see for yourself. So the firms were, let me see, the two legal firms were Burness Paul, there was 7 million implicated with them, and Levy-McRae with 28 million. So it was all criminal, but it's not anymore. Because the Ponzi scheme has disappeared. It's been dropped.
It's been dropped from the criminal prosecution was against 4 individuals. So we had Andrew Sobolewski, Andrew Miller, Scott Carmichael, and Gregory King. And they were under investigation by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland for a very rapid 5 years, and the conclusion is, I'll read it because it's good to get the wording right. Spokesman for the Crown Office said, following full and careful consideration of the facts and circumstances of the case, including the currently available admissible evidence, Crown Counsel instructed that there should be no proceedings at this time. Now, the interesting thing here is this Crown Counsel is obviously an independent QC operating for the Crown. I've been told that wasn't exactly the whole story, that there in fact were 3 independent Crown Counsels who walked away from this case feeling unable to either come to that conclusion or to pursue it in along a different path.
So how do we summarise that? A crime, 400 million disappeared into the long grass?
Well, it would appear to be an accident because we've got, well, it appears that there's no crime being committed as in the opinion of the Crown Office. But the cases do go on. The case against the first of those law firms that you named has actually been abandoned. And the case against Levy and McRae actually is continuing. 28.4 million action by Mr Duffy against the law firm Levy and McRae and some of its former and present partners is due to be heard in May. The claim relates to payments in 2007 of 19 million and 9.4 million pounds, which Heather made to the Glasgow-based law firm's client account, and these payments were then transferred offshore. There's also an unexplained payment of £200,000 made to Peter Watson, the former Levy and McRae partner, who has been suspended as a part-time sheriff for the past 3 years. So that one is due to come up in May, so we'll see if that also closes down, but that's still ongoing, and we'll watch carefully.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Brexit, and let's talk about Femi. Femi Olawale, who's 27 years old, and he's set up this organisation apparently called Our Future, Our Choice, #StopBrexit. It's a campaign. It's on Facebook, Twitter, all the usual social media stuff. Apparently there's a crowdfunder running as well. And he was appearing on Sky News this morning because he wanted to make the point that the under 55 population of the UK voted to remain. This is he's following a YouGov survey which said that 71% of young people between 18 and 24 voted to remain, compared to 60% of those aged between 50 and 64. So he's saying that the under 55 population of the UK voted to remain. So in 5 years' time, by absolutely anyone's maths, we have a population that voted to remain within the EU. Because everybody else is going to be dead, is basically what he was saying, right? So he said, Mum, Dad, I didn't vote for this. Yes, I still have more to learn in life, but I know that this future isn't the one we want, and quite simply, it's going to affect me a lot more than it will affect you. In terms of the economy, with all the conflicting facts out there, you can't be 100% certain that this won't make my life harder in the future. I know you love me. I know you want me to be happy long into the future, so please, if the country gets the chance to vote on a final deal, give me the future that I want for myself. So this is the basis of his campaign.
Who is he, Mike?
He's a young guy who's decided to be a campaigner. Who is he? Don't know. But just by coincidence today, the chairman of the Best for Britain campaign, Lord Malloch Brown, was basically making exactly the same point. He said Brexiteers are dying off. He didn't say that luckily Uncle George isn't dying off, so I can afford to bring you this message.
You're referring to Mr. Soros.
I am indeed, yes. But he would have said that if he'd had the opportunity to say that. All this worry about Brexiteers getting old and dying off doesn't apply to Uncle George. In the meantime, the pressure builds against Brexit. Because Robert Hannigan, the former GCHQ director, has come out. He was speaking on Radio 4 this morning, and he's extremely concerned. I'm not sure why somebody from GCHQ should be concerned about the defence industry in particular. I suppose he's entitled to be concerned about that as anybody else, but he's decided to speak about it. Not sure how that applies to his past experience, but anyway, he said increasingly our defence sector has been collaborating with European partners, particularly on research and innovation, which is no longer really affordable for a medium-sized country. So because Britain is now such a rubbish country and can't fend for itself, it's no longer independent in any area, never mind defence.
We just can't cope.
Can't cope. We've got to buy into this interdependence with all these other countries and make sure that we stick with that. He said people now, as in every area of Brexit, want to hear some detail about what does that mean, and on the really difficult issues, what is the plan that's going to be put to Brussels. One of the things we will be withdrawing from are the mechanisms that influence European policy and on sanctions, for example, on other areas of common security and defence policy. The government had said it wants to be fully part of that conversation. It needs to now set out what is the proposal for that. How are we going to interact with the EU in the future on policy and defence and security? Well, again, another coincidence, because somebody from the European side has been commenting on this as well, and that is Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO Secretary General. He was also speaking on the Radio 4 Today programme this morning, and he said that the Brits should realise that while you're leaving the European Union, you will still have to comply with rules that are decided within the European Union. He said that, for example, we're going to have to follow rules on data protection, which would include jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And he said, it's obvious that you've decided to leave the EU. We will respect that. But in an interconnected world, you also have to realize your dependence on the other partner. We did so in Denmark. Denmark is not an integrated part of Europol, for instance, but we have to comply with the same rules as other partners in Europe. I'm concerned that as far as we can see, security is not on the radar screen right now, but it's very complicated. When it comes to trade, you will have the WTO tariffs to fall back on. But when it comes to security, you don't have any fallback option. That's why you have to address these issues in due time. But don't worry, we will be staying within the rules, he says. And he's not the only one, because the British government is about to announce its new roadmap for how the City of London is going to interoperate with the European Union post-Brexit. And the message is the same. Basically, we're going down the road of mutual recognition, apparently. But we're going to be very careful to monitor divergence in the rules, because we can't have any divergence in the rules. So the UK and the EU would recognise each other's regulatory and supervisory regimes, but there would have to be a monitoring system for any kind of divergence to make sure that it doesn't get too broad and it's all brought back, because we've got to comply with the rules. This is, as I've said and you've said many times before, Brexit without the exit, because if you are signing up to terms and conditions which are tantamount to being within the European Union, then you're effectively within the European Union.
Yeah, and also what we're beginning to see very, very clearly, of course, that the Westminster government isn't really our government at all. What is happening is that we've got this deep state government, which is everything from the security services linked through to the banks and vast multinational corporations that are pulling the strings. When Mr. Rasmussen said what we must do, Mike, a well-known, probably Glaswegian expression, which is something along the lines of "go away," came into my head. David, it's time the British public started to really call these people to account. It's obvious that we've got treason here. There's no other word for it.
And this is the beauty of Brexit, right? For all that's being subverted and was being subverted from before it happened, the vote is a fact that they constantly have to get round. So what you're seeing here is the deep state is becoming much more obvious, and it's becoming much more obvious that it's the deep state versus the people. And sometimes, the deep state aren't all that clever, because here we've got George Soros and all of his money, and what's he decided to do to lead a campaign to get some old enough to know better big kid who needs a thick ear to whine at his parents. I don't think this is actually going to play all that well, and it's certainly not going to persuade people to love the EU. So I sense a certain desperation in the tactics that have been used here, as well as fraud and treason.
Well, indeed. Now, if there were any coincidences in that report, we've got more coincidences now, because as Patrick Henningsen was reporting yesterday, Monsieur Macron in France has decided perhaps to reinstate national service, bring young people into the military for some military experience. And just by coincidence, on the other side of the channel, we're building up to pretty much the same thing. So here's another YouGov survey. Well, it isn't about processed food, actually, because the second question on the list is, would you support or oppose bringing back compulsory military service for young people who would serve for a month within the armed forces? And there's a majority, apparently, in the YouGov poll suggesting that would be a great idea. And again, by coincidence, today on Talk Radio, Colonel Richard Kemp, should we bring back national service? We talked to Colonel Richard Kemp in a few moments, and looking at his tweets this morning, I haven't heard this interview with Kemp, but looking at his tweets this morning, he seemed to be pretty much in favour of it. Just a coincidence that on both sides of the channel, Brian, we seem to be heading in the same direction.
Yeah, and it's remarkable. And one of the things that makes it remarkable for me is that if you talk to the military about conscription, they actually don't like it, because if you have a volunteer military system, then the people are there because they want to be there. The quality is higher, the dedication is higher. If you bring people in who clearly don't want to be there, you end up with all sorts of problems. So what is Colonel Richard Kemp's agenda? I don't know what he has actually said. I think he needs to be watched closely as to
well, what he said was it worked well during the war, so and we had it until 1963. And
it worked well during the war because the average person could work out that they needed to join the effort if there was going to be a defence for the country. That's not the same thing as in peacetime, but maybe Colonel Kemp knows that Theresa May's Operation Barbarossa is being ramped up, and he expects us to be at war with the Russians.
Yes. David, a few stories on Israel here. First of all, we've got Sputnik's headline saying Israel believes it has destroyed up to 50% of Syrian air defences in the strike. Well, I think this is frankly a reaction from the Israeli government to the fact that they lost an F-16. They're a bit embarrassed about that, so they're making the most ridiculous statements possible. But Ynet here reporting that the IDF is about to introduce a new missile corps. They're developing missiles which could strike in all of Lebanon and deeply into Syria. So perhaps Israel getting a bit embarrassed about the loss of the F-16, and they're thinking, well, maybe we don't want to take any risk with any more F-16, so we'll develop a missile corps instead. And a couple of articles that you're highlighting here, because they seem to be suggesting that they're getting more concerned, more vocal about Iran. And this headline saying, Israel Defense Minister, Iran declared war on us long ago. And the Jerusalem Post again saying Assad in danger if he allows Iran to attack Israel from Syria. I mean, is this? Do you think these headlines are hysteria over the fact that they lost an aircraft?
No, I think it's deeper than that. The aircraft was interesting because the aircraft came down well within Israel. So that would suggest that anti-aircraft missile systems from Syria are able to dominate a substantial amount of airspace. So that's an interesting point in terms of the strategic balance. What we're seeing here is Israeli cabinet members and part of the sort of inner security cabinet making it clear that they see Syria and Hezbollah and Iran as one giant opponent, and if they're hit by any part of it, they reserve the right to hit back anywhere they choose. So this is them manufacturing an ideology for further intervention in Syria and potentially further intervention against Iran. It's extremely aggressive, and I mean it's very concerning all around, and again shows this lack of any strategic vision and any longer term view coming from the Israeli government.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let's switch to reports in the last couple of days about Julian Assad. It appears Russia Today. Assange, I beg your pardon. Yeah. Here is Russia Today. Judge who upheld Julian Assange's warrant, question over links to security services. So this man is trapped, it appears, ever more, and thus able to speak in the embassy. I think he's done 6 years, or coming up for 6 years. So we have a court case, and the judge says, no, if you come out, we're going to arrest you. And quite a few of the media organisations took a little look at who this lady was, but I didn't feel they went deep enough, so I thought we'd do a little bit of UK column analysis. So let's follow it through. Well, who's the lady we're looking at? It's this lady, Emma Arbuthnot, senior district judge. She's also got the title Lady Arbuthnot of Edrom, so that's fine. Now, she's interesting because she was a former senior legal advisor to the Director of Public Prosecution, so that's a cosy little arrangement there. Where do we go? She was also the magistrate for Lord Janner when he was brought into court, clearly dribbling and unable to actually speak for himself. She was in that one, so we'll bring in Janner, which is fascinating. But here's her husband, Lord James Arbuthnot, chair of the Defence Select Committee 2005 to 2014, former junior Tory Defence Minister and Government Whip, former parliamentary chair, Conservative Friends of Israel. and we'll add a couple more. So he's got Babcock International as a personal client, and he's chairman of the advisory board of Thales Group. So getting around quite a bit there. So the background is defence, high-level British government, but the judge didn't recuse herself. She doesn't think there's anything wrong with her position on Assange. Husband, very active. He set up the security intelligence consultancy SC Strategy Limited. And as you do, you need some powerful friends. So one of his colleagues, one of his directors is former head of MI6, Sir John Scarlett. Chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee at the time of the dodgy dossier, which of course was making false weapons claims against Iraq. And the other gentleman working with him in that company is Lord Carlisle, former Welsh Lib Dem leader. Also, what have we got here? Headed the independent review on how the Church of England handled child abuse accusations against the Bishop of Chichester, George Bell. So he's done some good work there. He's also was reviewer of anti-terror legislation and a supporter of the Snoopers Charter. We'll come on to that a little bit more. We then find that personal friend, acquaintance of Janner himself, certainly via Friends of Israel and patrons of Lawyers for Israel. So that's a very interesting little circuit there. And then a lot of the press pointing out that the key client for SC Strategy Limited is the Qatar Investment Authority, handling about 338 billion in assets. So clear justice here.
So in a nutshell, then, we have a judge which made a decision on Julian Assange, who is directly connected to a nest of vipers who are the types of people that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks would be releasing documents about, or would
Trying
be
to expose.
Facilitating the release of documents
Yes,
about.
yeah, absolutely.
So she's clearly independent.
Yes, in the way that we should use that word.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So just fascinating. Did Assange get a fair trial? I don't think so. What are these people up to in the background? We need to ask. And one of the things I'm going to say, again, Mike, what do we find? We constantly find these people are part of this organisation, Conservative Friends for Israel. My comment is, if it was Conservative Friends for Italy and we had the Italians buried deep into British politics, I wouldn't be very happy. How is it that Israel can get away with this? David, I'm going to throw this rather hot ball in your direction.
Thanks for that. This is why we're talking to people like Gilad Atzmon, because it's a very unique position, and to get an understanding of the culture and pressure and power that means that Israel can get away with this is a complex and fascinating study. And yes, I would refer people to our interviews with Gilad Atzmon where we explore this in detail.
Okay, well, let's just hop back and we'll come on to this gentleman, Craig Murray, because he had quite a lot to say about Lord Carlisle. He said this: Carlisle went on to be a stunningly illiberal independent. Oh, there you are, Mike. Yeah. Independent reviewer of anti-terror legislation, where he demonstrated his independence by agreeing to absolutely everything the security services told him. 42 detention with no charge, no problem. In fact, there was no period of detention without charge posited so extreme that Carlisle did not support it. Secret courts hearing intelligence evidence the defence were not allowed to see, fine by Carlisle. Control orders, great. He's a fantastic bastion. Protecting the public is Carlisle. Even better, of course, of protecting his associates. Yeah. And somebody's posted here that Lord Carlisle, who often defends the work of intelligence services, has earned $400,000 from consultancy formed with Sir John Scarlett. Yeah. So pretty mucky stuff. And there's the key client for that security consultancy. So that's where the 328 billion is sloshing around, helping to pay for this obscure consultancy there. Pretty dark, murky stuff, really.
Yes. Now, David, back to Scotland for a second and freedom of information. And we're starting off with the Scottish Law Reporter who's tweeting out an FOI complaint in England. Scots Police Federation should comply with FOI Scotland. Suggest you call for this improvement. Give us the background to this.
Well, it transpires that in the United Kingdom, not all organisations are equal. That if you've got a Scottish organisation, it tends to be a little exempt. And the Scottish Police Federation, which represents the interests of police officers, is exempt from Freedom of Information Act, Freedom of Information Scotland Act, unlike its English and Welsh counterparts. So here you see the Scottish Law Reporter asking the Scottish Information Commissioner to address this and see if this could be corrected. So what you see next is their response by Twitter. As thanks, we'll add it to our list of bodies to propose to ministers. Individuals can also make their own representations. So they seemed quite keen at that point to take this forward. And there was, in fact, discussion behind the scenes between the Scottish Information Commissioner and the Scottish Police Federation. And then a couple of strange things happened. Firstly, the Scottish Police Federation receives £370,000 a year by way of direct grant aid from the Scottish Government. 8 days after this issue came up, would you be surprised to learn, gentlemen, that they wrote to the Scottish Government and said they didn't want the money anymore? It's a very interesting letter I have here. It's from Callum Steele, General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, and it's dated 25th of May 2017. And he says that while the grant accounts show a paper loss, so the money's been more than expended, he continues, the Scottish Police Federation considers therefore that continued payment of a grant to the SPF makes little sense and formally requests a termination of the SPF grant facilities. The money's being paid directly to the SPA as part of the global policing settlement or otherwise as the government sees fit. So they don't want, immediately when the issue of freedom of information comes up, they don't want the government money. I wonder if that's related. Now, the issue of freedom of information was raised because of representations made to the Scottish Law Reporter by serving police officers. They were finding that the Scottish Police Federation were not representing their interests, particularly in whistleblowing situations. And they wanted that support and they wanted to find out why it was missing. And attempts to find out what is going wrong were failing because of their exemption from the Freedom of Information Act. So that's the background. There's going to be more on this, I understand, probably later today in the Scottish Law Reporter Twitter account and Diary of Injustice, which is an excellent blog published from Scotland. So I would ask people to look out for that.
Okay, and to end on the Scottish stuff then, this is the Courier saying that £50 million has been spent on severance payments at one Scottish council. That's 5 councils since 2011. That seems like a lot of money. Who have they been getting rid of?
Well, they've been getting rid of 1,555 employees, and it's cost them £49,419,000. It's £31,000 per employee. And the total for the whole of Scotland is 627 million in the last 7 years. And if you pro-rata that for the UK, I'm assuming England and Wales have been laying people off at a similar rate, you get the sum of 7 billion. So there's quite a lot of government money, quite a lot of tax money paying people off. Now, if this was the state doing less and shrinking, frankly, I would be cheering. But I don't feel that the state is having less involvement in my life.
No, indeed.
Well, it probably isn't. I'm sure it isn't, in fact. And I just picked up this while I was preparing the news today, and it fascinated me. We've got unaccountable big society at work. If we pop that across, Mike.
Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong.
There we are.
Okay.
Coming up, here we are.
Yep.
So it's the Young Foundation, and they say, thank you at Susanna Katemel, I think, for inspiring our first cohort of ventures, reimagining rent with your story, tips and insights into how you scaled at Homes for Good, the hashtag SOSANT helping Scottish tenants find the right home. So we're led to believe that the Young Foundation, which is buried right at the heart of the government's Big Society programme, is using these illustrious young people in this very posh, warm boardroom to sort out rent problems in Scotland. I was a little bit suspicious of this, David, so I couldn't resist just posting a little bit of a tweet on their page. Room full of unaccountable Young Foundation, young lovies, unelected, unaccountable, and reeking of open democracy, helping Scots find homes. Yeah, right. We need to get in amongst these people, but this is the real government being formed here. This is participatory democracy. It's not a vote by individual men and women. This is agencies, foundations, trusts working with the government behind closed doors. It's very insidious stuff.
Participatory democracy, we know from the name person fight, means that as long as you agree with the agenda, you can participate. That's all it means. The agenda, its origin is completely opaque. And on the subject of reimagining rents, I would simply point out there's an excellent textbook on the economic effects of rent control, and it has in it a series of photographs where the reader is asked to differentiate between rent control and carpet bombing, and you know it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I thought we should end on a somewhat humorous, humorous note, and we've just got this very fine picture of the US Navy's warship Zumwalt. This has swallowed billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's sat there very lonely on its own because it hasn't been working too well. Apparently there's another one coming along. But what we wanted to tell you today is that there is a cunning US plan for these ships. Do you know what it is, Mike?
No.
It's very cunning. I think the Russians are going to be particularly frightened of this. They're going to use it to kill ships.
Right.
So it's a warship. Presumably you design a warship to be able to take on other warships, big or small, but not this one because apparently it hasn't been doing anything. So the Navy's decided that now they need to give it a proper role, and it's going to have some missiles and it's going to kill ships. David, there's something badly wrong in America. We think it's probably the same disease that we've got here, but to spend multi-billions on this new warship that couldn't get out to sea over the winter because it got itself frozen in one of the more northern ports. The thought process is broken down in the US Navy, it appears.
Well, it's safer frozen in harbour because if it went out, it would only bump into an oil tanker.
Yes, okay, we'll leave it there. What I'll just add before we go is that it's been pointed out that the Qatar Investment Agency, which is the lead client for SC Strategy Limited, one of our viewers has said, well, actually, isn't that the front for the Clinton racket? If that is the case, it makes the whole of this extremely interesting because, of course, Assange was working particularly hard to expose what the Clintons had been doing. But do freeze the screen and have a look at that diagram for yourselves. That's it for today. Thank you very much, David, for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Monday. And once again, if you're not a subscriber of UK Column and you're enjoying our news, please subscribe because we can only do what we do with your financial help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.